Welcome all to a very new podcast, the first episode, the Unnamed Footy Podcast. Today we have Alborz good friend of mine over at UVM, big Chelsea guy. So obviously football's been on hold for the last 2 months, 2.5 months, you'd say. And it hasn't been very fun for any of us because we've all been stuck at home with nothing to watch other than the Netflix shit that we've already seen 1,000 times and reruns of football matches. I've been watching a lot of those. But other than that, there's big news this week, obviously, with the Bundesliga restarting. It's obviously not the same, It's not what any of us want, but it's not like we have a choice other than the fanless games. So, Alborz, what's your take on the potential of any league coming back other than just the Bundesliga?
Well, just for starters, it's great to have some live footy back. As you said, we love watching just the reruns of some of the best games that we witnessed over the past 20 years and beyond. But just to, have live footy back is, obviously great, even though these are unprecedented times and just the conditions that the Bundesliga is back in is, we've never seen anything like it before. And we have to adjust to it, and we have to accept that this is the new norm. And, more or less we will have to roll with this for the next a year or so. But yeah, I think that this is of the other leagues are watching closely to see, how the resumption of the Bundesliga, how it's going to just all like come together. And I think that, these past few days is a good setting stone to look at and kind of see, all right, well, if we, do things like this, what's the best way to move forward? And I think this will be a very successful return.
So the one thing I wanted to think about was obviously the Champions League, and for our wager as well, which you guys don't know about, me and him, I'm a Spurs fan, he's a Chelsea fan. We had kind of a little wager going for what team would go further in the Champions League. It looks like both of us aren't making it past the round of 16, like COVID aside. But, listen, the one thing is the Bundesliga can resume because they're only traveling within their country that seemed to completely flatten the curve. Same with the UK if the Premier League does resume. And obviously, the rules and the game itself are going to be a lot different. I know that there's 5 substitutes, I think, in the Bundesliga right now, which is a big rule change. There's also no atmosphere. So home games and away games are essentially the same thing. So, that sort of thing can resume. But you look at the Champions League, and it's just – I don't think it's going to resume this year for the simple fact that – well, first of all, with leagues, there's relegation, there's European qualification, and there's the league title. With the Champions League, there's the Champions League final and the eventual champion who will automatically qualify for the next year's tournament. So, and same with the Europa League, obviously, but there's no relegation. There's no, hundreds of millions at stake. There's no potential for the lawsuits of teams that aren't going to, stay within the league. So I don't think the Champions League is as essential as the Premier League or as the Bundesliga, just for the simple fact that there's a lot at stake for some smaller clubs that won't be able to financially keep up with teams like, Bayern Munich, or in the Premier League's sake, like Man City and Liverpool. But, the Champions League, we all love to see it. We just have to accept that if it comes back, it's going to be completely not the format that we love and are used to. And it would honestly, if they were to bring it back, it would need to be after all this is done, like after middle of the summer, I think. And it would also have to be like very travel restricted, happen within a 2-week frame, kind of like a half World Cup. And there wouldn't be 2 legs. Because if you think about the whole point of 2 legs is to have the home and away leg and the away goal rule, that wouldn't exist. It would just be, in my opinion, just 1 leg with no crowd. And they would do the same draw system. It wouldn't be the same. And I think for those reasons that travel between certain European countries is very restricted, obviously, and also potentially dangerous for players that could get infected and managers alike. And the simple fact that, there's no relegation, there's not as much at stake. I don't think the Champions League is going to come back this season. I think they're going to scrap the Champions League. I think the Europa League will go down the same path. They've already done it with the French League. And that's based on the government saying we don't think it's safe enough we don't think it's essential enough for sports to come back. The same thing happened in the Dutch league, but the polarization of it is that PSG were given the league title and Ajax were not given the league title. And, that's based on the leagues and the financial football association of that league to decide. But I was baffled when I heard Ajax didn't get the league title, because I liked what the French league did, where they just took a kind of like a what was it, points per game average for each team and made the table based on that. But teams didn't know this was going to happen or that was going to be the rule going into the break. So it's a little confusing for all of us as football fans to see that happen. I don't think that would ever happen in the Premier League. I think they would void the season before something like that happened.
See, this is, yeah, I mean, I agree with you, but the one thing I will say is that if you just look at the margin that, the marginal points between Paris Saint-Germain and like all the other French teams, there's a wide gap between, I don't know, Marseille and Lille, I think, are the second, third place
Yeah.
teams. But in the Eredivisie, obviously Ajax were tied on points with AZ Alkmaar. And although, if you're gonna award league titles for every league, you can't just void one. And in my opinion, I think that's wrong. Even if it's close, even if it's tied on points, you gotta figure it out somehow. But I think that it would have been tough on AZ had they awarded the title to Ajax, because although I think Ajax had a better goal difference, AZ had beaten them twice when they played during the season. So, obviously the margins were very tight, and with more than 10 games to go, I think it would have been, I think AZ would have felt pretty hard done by had Ajax been awarded the league title. So I can understand that from that perspective, but I don't know. I just don't like every league doing their own thing. I think it would be nice to have kind of one well-organized structural plan that all the leagues in Europe that that are under UEFA regulations can follow. I feel like that'll make every league have an easier time to kind of just progress through the season, or if they want to stop it, because if they're just relying on their own federation to come up with ways to kind of fix the situation, I just feel like that will kind of add to the big mess. But I mean, I don't think there are many complaints in the French league. I think some of the teams that got relegated could feel hard done by, considering there are so many points to play for and so many points up for grabs. At the same time, if you're not going to void the season, and if you void the season, then you're wasting the 3/4 of the season that already had gone by. So I get why you wouldn't want to void it, but I think it's unfair, especially if you're going to have the relegation and promotion system, which the French league are doing. And then I know just recently the English Football League announced that the League Two will have promotion, but no relegation. I think that's a good idea, because for teams to get relegated during this pandemic when they can't even finish out their games, I think is extremely unfair. And obviously there's the financial aspect of this too. And obviously teams would lose a lot of money if they're relegated. And I just think that would be unfair given the circumstances.
No, yeah, that's a very valid point, because when you think about the Premier League, for example, and it's obviously not to the same extent in other leagues, but with the Premier League, the bottom club makes more than the winner of the Champions League. That's just the amount of money that there is on the line. And not just that, the teams getting promoted from the championship, they worked, incredibly hard to get to where they are. I think it's Leeds are at the top of the table right now, correct?
Yes.
And this would be their first time back in the top flight for a good 15 years. So it would be so hard to take that away from them. But at the same time, what I'm thinking about with the French league is, or not like the leagues that have ended already that just couldn't continue. This whole pandemic, yes, it did, like, relatively speaking, happen very quick, and everything shut down pretty quickly. Like, I remember there was a week or two where there was some games in the Champions League that were blackout games, no fans. And then there was some Serie A games that got postponed. And then there was a couple Premier League games that got postponed because of players and managers having COVID. And then out of nowhere, all football shut down. But this didn't just come out of the blue. I think there was about between early February and early March that everyone was starting to prepare for this to be like an inevitability. And I think that teams that were not ready for this financially, they're obviously going to be burdened the worst. But when you look at the way the Premier League works, the amount of money some of these teams are investing each season, like, I don't know if you've seen Sunderland Till I Die.
But I finished that last.
Yeah, so did I. And no matter what owner they have, they invest with the prospect of getting promoted, right? Like this season, they're I think they're in 5th place. They're in a playoff spot in the
barely.
But the whole season shut down, and the crazy thing you have to think about is they invest with the prospect of going up because they're a big club. A team like Norwich City, who's bottom of the Premier League, are they investing with the prospect of staying up? Because they've been, they have no idea where they're going to be. Even before this crazy times happen, you have to prepare for the worst as a club, as a human being, whatever, as a business. You have to prepare for the worst. And as sad as it is to see some clubs not being able to be promoted, not being able to be relegated, I think that, one, there's more important things at stake. And two, what options does the league have? Because to just void the season, like, I know what you're saying, like, in many senses, it feels like that 3/4 of the season was wasted. In so many other respects, it wasn't. Because for the simple, like Liverpool, for example, 2 games away from the title, it's highway robbery if they don't win the title, right? So if you void the season, what the fuck did they get out of this whole season? Whereas if you void it and count it and relegate teams or not relegate teams, whatever you want to do, at least Liverpool has that, like, something to hold on to from the season, because they had the best record up to this point of any Premier League team in history. They were on course to beat Man City's 100-point record, and they just were. I thought they were, like, genuinely going to do it. And to take that away from them, as much as we hate Liverpool, to take that away from the fans, from the players that have worked so hard all season, I think it's even tougher than relegating a team, to be quite honest. Because I know the financial side of it for, like, a team like Norwich, a team like Bournemouth, a team like Aston Villa that are in the bottom 3 right now, horrible implications on your club to be relegated. But for a team as big as Liverpool to have 30 years with no league title, they genuinely deserve to win it. The teams that are, on the verge of relegation, you can't argue whether or not they were going to stay up. You really can't make a valid argument. Maybe Norwich was the only team that was, like, probably favorites to go down out of the rest of the group. But Liverpool, mathematically speaking, they haven't won it yet, but they're, like, as close as you can get. Because even if they lost the rest of their games in some fluke world, Man City would have to win the rest of their games, which they're just not going to do. So there's so much that you have to think of. There's so many moving pieces with this whole thing. I'm just interested to see how this is going to function with the season coming up in the 2022 World Cup, because that's going to be in the winter. That's going to cut the season not in half, but it's going to cut the season up. So if they can find a way to end this Premier League season, and the rest of the league seasons, France and Eredivisie aside, if they could find a way to, like, model the season around the starting of the 22 World Cup and have some games in the summer over the next season or two, I think that's what they're going to end up having to do, because this break right now has essentially been not just a summer break, because most players and teams are traveling, doing friendlies around the world during their summer break. This has been a break, like a complete break off football. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see Premier League games running from end of June till July. And I know it's not realistic with football and the heat and all this and that, but there's nothing else to work with. There's so much money on the line in the Premier League. There's so much potential for lawsuits that the league would face if they just voided the season. So it's just, I don't see them going down the same route. And I agree with you. I wish every league could do the same thing. It just doesn't make sense for some leagues to continue, whereas the Premier League, it doesn't make sense to just end it. And we might be a little biased because we watch the Premier League every week, but I don't think you can disagree with the fact that the amount of money on the line is it's an elephant in the room. It's a glaring issue that's going to come.
Yeah. Well, first of all, just as someone who, as a football fan, dislikes Liverpool a lot, putting all the hatred and animosity aside, they deserve the title. They are miles ahead of Man City, and it would be wrong not to get the title, in my opinion. No matter what you do with the rest, you have to work on the title. And I know it's very tight from third place. I mean, Man City is pretty much stoned in second place, although with their whole ban and all that going on.
And Leicester too. Leicester's locked.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. I mean, they're Wolves, Leicester, Sheffield are 3 teams that will feel very hard done by if the season gets voided. But at the end of the day, you can't pick and choose. If you're making a decision, it can be, for sentiment. Like, obviously as football fans, we want the best for our teams, and obviously Chelsea and Spurs are kind of on the outside looking in a bit. I know we're in that 4th spot, but United, we're kind of coming back to form. So obviously, as fans of our own clubs, we want this season to continue. Like, there's a lot on the line, especially for Spurs, like new manager. the players have something to prove to him after a disappointing UCL exit. So there's a lot, there's a lot to play for from the perspective of many teams. But again, we have to make a logistic decision. And as you mentioned, also with the World Cup being in Qatar, and obviously that being played in the winter time, and the Euros being postponed back a year, you can't. Things have to be planned accordingly. You can't just make the decision. All right, we're going to play out the season this way. You got to think ahead, because if you're going to continue the Champions League in mid-August, which is kind of what they're talking about, then you're going to finish it late August, and then you have to start the qualifying rounds right after. You know what I'm saying? So we can't really afford to have next year's Champions League start in like October or November, because the teams got to prepare for the Euros. It'll be too much. It'll be just too much pressure on the players, and I just hope that whatever happens, the schedules for next year and the year after won't be affected, because that's definitely a question we have to ask going forward.
It's a mess, and the issue I have is the uncertainty. Is the biggest issue at hand.
Right.
With moving forward with the next season, we all know that COVID isn't going anywhere. Even if there is a vaccine, it's not going anywhere. So the sad truth of it all is I don't think football will resume in any capacity. I don't think they're just going to start a new season. I think that, let's say we get to middle of August, which is when seasons usually start. And let's say we did play out the Champions League. We did play out the Premier League. They found time to finish those leagues off like they are with the Bundesliga right now. Resuming a season at a time like this, starting a new season at a time like this would be, I think, completely beyond, ridiculous. And I know we all want to see the football we know and love, but we won't see that for at least a year. So as sad as it is to think about, I don't think they should just start a new season for the sake of public health, first and foremost, and for the sake of logistics. Because like you said, we can't just be squeezing the Champions League. And because we won't be seeing, obviously, the 5 substitution thing was based on the fact that all these games are going to be packed way more so than before. And to think that we could be watching a Champions League with players debilitated from having to play out their leagues, having to play out this and that, it's not what we want to see. And for the sake of the players, like you said, we don't want to see anything like that. And my question to you would be, let's say they void the Premier League, for example, just like they did with the Eredivisie. What teams would be qualifying for the next, not next season's Champions League, because we won't call it that, but the next Champions League? Do you think they would do a coefficient type of thing with the top ranked teams in the Premier League? Because I think that would be the most unfair way to do it. But a lot of people are saying that's what they're going to do. But what's your opinion on that?
It's a good question, because if you look at, there's certain leagues such as the Bundesliga where teams like Schalke and Bayer Leverkusen, who are not doing that great, in their league, would have higher coefficients than a team like Mönchengladbach and Leipzig, just because of previous years in the competition. So that raises the question, teams that are doing, like, for example, Sheffield United, if we're going to judge who's going to go in European competition based on coefficient, Sheffield are not going to be there. So I think, there'd be a lot of questions coming with that. For me, if you're going to avoid the season, and if you're not going to take into account the results that have happened thus far, I think you got to go into the next Champions League, whenever that may be. You got to go with the same teams that were in it, this season. For me, that's the only way you can do it. But if you were to do that, then I think that would entail that this Champions League would be scrapped off, because, I feel like that could be a justifying reason of why to do it that way, because if you continue the Champions League and play it out in whatever format, it may be, then I guess there'd be questions if you're going to have the same teams. But if you're going to avoid it, I think it'll be unfair to do it by coefficient, because, there may be teams that are high up in the coefficient list that are, mid-table, and they don't deserve to be playing the Champions League, not at all. So I think that you gotta play it as it was the previous season. And, as Chelsea and Spurs fans, we were both in that Champions League. So I guess from that perspective, we'll be like, all right, it doesn't matter much because we're going to be in it. But from a Manchester United perspective or a Leicester City perspective, or Wolves or Sheffield, you've had tremendous seasons with breakout stars, and you're generating all this revenue, and then you're looking forward to making the cash from playing in Europe next year and just ticket price and everything, and then you get told by UEFA, all right, we're gonna have the same teams from next year. I would be devastated and honestly like very, very disappointed with that. But
Yeah.
I don't know. It's not a simple thing to answer. That's for
I
sure.
think one thing that's resonated with me a lot since this whole, this whole shutdown is that I think a lot of the associations and organizations that make these decisions, I think pleasing the fans at this point and, thinking about the reaction that things are going to get, I don't think that's top of their priority for the simple fact that there's way more logistic issues that clubs like, Spurs, for example, Chelsea, big clubs have to worry about. Their brand is at stake. And the thing is, if we're thinking about a good example would be the Champions League, pleasing the fans would be just having some football. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think too many people are going to complain to an extent where, either way they do it. Let's say they end the season right now and the teams that are in the top four, teams that are fifth to seventh, they all get their European spots. The teams that, first of all, teams that are not in that are going to be felt like way more hard done by than the teams that are in it. That's an obvious thing that you pointed out. Even the teams in it are going to feel like they didn't earn that position. They're going to feel like there was still points to play for. We didn't truly earn this position. Yes, they're not going to complain. We're in the Leicester City's going to say, well, we're in the Champions League. We can't complain. We're where we want to be as a club. We're where we never thought we were going to be as a club before the season. But they're not going to feel as though they earned that spot because the actual season didn't play out in the way that it should have. So either way, there's going to be a lot of issues. But I think the main thing is we just want to watch football. With the Bundesliga, like, I know it's not the same. I know there's no atmosphere. I know it feels weird. The players don't even fucking hug each other after they score a goal. Like, how weird is that? They're sharing the same dressing room, the same team bus, the same everything. They're sweating on each other the whole game, and then they don't celebrate together. I know it's setting the wrong example if they didn't do the whole, elbow bump like Lewandowski did today and the whole, Erling Haaland celebration where they all stand 6 feet apart. I get it. It's setting the wrong example to the viewers that, we're going to pretend like there's no pandemic. But we just want to watch football. I was watching that Dortmund-Schalke game. I know it was a blowout. I was just enjoying the fact that I was finally watching football again. And the same goes for the Bayern games today. The same will go for the Bayern-Dortmund game that's next week. But I'm super hyped for that.
Oh
And
yeah.
I don't care there's not going to be fans. My dad pointed something out to me that was very important. He said, I thought the tempo of the game was going to change a lot with no atmosphere. And he's like, it hasn't. And I don't know if that's a fact because they're 2 months of rest for fully fitness, or if it's they've just been training to get back to where they are now, or if it's a simple fact that they're professionals and they're going to act like professionals regardless of the circumstances. I just want to watch football. I know you do too. I'm really glad that we can. Just speaking about the games, obviously there's no atmosphere. Obviously it's different. I love the Bundesliga. I'm not a huge Bundesliga fan. I never have been like an active viewer. I know the teams, I know the players. I respect the league because it has the highest attendance of any football league. It has, a huge viewership, some great clubs, some great football, and obviously the Germans are one of the best teams, one of the best providers of world talent of all time. But the fact that it's the only league anyone can watch right now, it's shedding a lot of the light on the lower teams that never get the spotlight. And that's one positive, I think. I have Union Berlin playing today. I didn't know Subasic played for them. The guy who used to play for, he's played for Dortmund. Pretty cool. It's pretty cool that that you get to see that. Like, there's certain things in football that you don't notice until they're, glaringly obvious to you. So if the Premier League came back, if it has the same format as the Bundesliga, I just want to see it happen. And I think tomorrow, Monday, the 18th, is going to be the vote. If I'm not mistaken, for whether or not they're going to come back. I don't expect they vote yes, for the simple fact that there's a lot of managers that are in their latter stages of their lives and don't want to, risk any infection. But you did notice on the sidelines, all the managers wearing masks. And I think it's weird to see, but at the same time, it's something. It's showing some respect that even if they were sick and they didn't know they were sick, they don't want to be spreading that through a game of football because that's not essential.
Right.
As much as we love football, it's a non-essential thing.
Yeah.
So,
Uh, uh, I,
yeah.
I just think also we have to adapt. We can't just continue to live this way of just being just super worried and just super cautious. Although I'm not. Don't get me wrong. I think it's great that all these measures are kind of being taken into consideration. But at the same time, you got to kind of try to return to normality. By a step by step gradual process. And I think that's what the Bundesliga is doing. And obviously, there are ways to do that. The Bundesliga and the German Federation have done I think, a good job of making sure that there's that distance and kind of there's that safety aspect to the game, which is more important than I guess the results or whatever happens on the pitch. But I know the situation in England is probably not as stable as in Germany, but at the same time, you got to use the Bundesliga model to kind of think about ways you can focus on your league and how to, the Premier League and how to kind of get it back going. And they're definitely there. There are ways to make it happen. So I think instead of just being all negative about it and just saying we're not ready, it's risky. It is risky, but at the same time, if we're going to continue with this mindset, we're not going to make any progress. The Bundesliga obviously was a big risk, and there's still people today that ask questions. Is it too soon? Is it risky? Is it too risky? Are the players, are their lives in danger? The coaches, and this. I think this will be a model, and I anticipated it to be successful. Judging based off the two days in which I've seen, I think 4 or 5 games. I think the formula they have set up is going to be a successful one, and I think it's definitely one that the other leagues should be following. But at the same time, if the players do not want to play, then there's not much you can do. If the coaches and the teams are unwilling to play, then there's not much the English Federation can do.
Yeah. I mean,
That's
one thing that's kind of funny that I would love to see too is how Gladbach, their home games are gonna have the cutouts of the fans.
yeah,
I would love to also for like the announcers or the radio to kind of have an atmosphere like
right.
let's say you get to Anfield, they play "You'll Never Walk Alone" before the game. They have the ambient noise of the crowd, the celebration. I know it's silly, but it would add something else to the game, and it would make it a little more feel like a little bit more like football. And to your point of are the players do they feel safe? Do they do this? You run the risk of putting yourself in danger every time you see someone. So even if you stay at home by yourself and isolate yourself, you have to get food. You have to go to work. You have to do this and that. We're running these sort of risks every day as human beings now in this time. So it's kind of like resuming football in the way that Germany's done, it all intents and purposes for me, it doesn't seem nearly as risky as some other ideas were. And it was, even watching Champions League highlights from Atletico Liverpool, like that was, mid pandemic for some countries. And they were still, celebrating, hugging the fan. Like seeing that is crazy to me. And even in Paris, when PSG won the game against Dortmund and were celebrating with thousands of fans outside the stadium. To think that was just less than 2 months ago, and to think that that was accepted as well. Some people raised red flags about it, but it was never a huge deal. You run that
Yeah.
risk all the time, and I think as human beings, like you said, we need to adapt. And we need to get used to there's that risk. That risk is always there. You run the risk of dying every time you get a new car. You run the risk of this and that. It doesn't just apply to football. So I'd love to see the Bundesliga back. I want to see other leagues model it off the same thing. I can't wait to see what happens with the rest of the season. And I also can't wait for another episode of the podcast. So probably running out of time here with the Zoom call and all. I'm kind of a cheap ass. Haven't purchased Zoom yet. Probably will at some point if we make this a regular thing. I think it's worth it for sure. But I had a great time talking to you. We'll probably definitely do another episode very soon. It'll be a lot easier when I'm in Vermont, just with my time and with everything going on. And I think it'll be a lot of fun if the Premier League resumes to actually get into some debates that have nothing to do with the shutdown, that have nothing to do with that. Get in some real debates about
Banner.
the banter of the football we get to see. So thanks for listening. If you did, make sure to subscribe or follow whatever you're listening to this on, watching this on. And Alborz, you want to take us away?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a pleasure. Definitely, we hope to kind of make this a more consistent thing. And then, to you guys, if you guys, feel like you want to, add something and just, come on the podcast to kind of share your voice and your opinions, then you're more than welcome. Hopefully, as football continues, there'll be more football to talk about, and less, about the whole pandemic stuff. Obviously it's important to talk about, but we want to get into the football side of it.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's been a pleasure, and definitely look forward to the next one.
For sure. All right. Have a good one.